Welcome to America's Policy Podcast. I am your host, Cassandra Alessio, and this is episode 24. I wanted to go over a few headlines that we've been reading a lot about lately in regards to tariff policies and housing policies and low birth rate policies, I guess you could say, and how everything is connected to the future of our economy. And we do see a lot about tariffs that's been making the news lately. And then there's pros and cons for both sides, right? But I think what's important is that we have to kind of work on as a country. Now, some states do this better and other states do very poorly in the idea that we should be pushing more small businesses. And the reason why I think that to some degree small businesses help the economy is because these are families, these are people, these are entrepreneurs that are trying to make a name for themselves, trying to build a business for themselves, trying to make money for themselves. And it is a way for people to make money without working for a big corporate company, because you'll see a lot of this in certain areas where there are people working for these big corporations and can't afford basic rent or a basic mortgage in that area. And when you work for a corporation like this, they usually will pay you depending on what that minimum wage is or something along the lines of what they think that payment should be in that area. So that's right. There's a huge discrepancy, right? There's a huge discrepancy in the sense that if you are able to get a full-time job, you should be able to afford basic living costs in that area. And that has changed dramatically. And I've said this before, and I will keep saying this, the middle class is disappearing. And this is the reason why. Jobs that were meant for younger people or people that wanted a part-time job, or maybe moms that wanted to go back to work, maybe they were home for a few years raising their children, or maybe college students or high school students, these jobs are now becoming full-time employment for people that are looking to pay for expenses that's include housing and food, etc. And that's what the difference is. We are seeing an economy that has changed rapidly. Middle class jobs are disappearing. And now you have, I would guess, lower income jobs, and then you have higher income jobs. And a lot of people are now turning to those lower income jobs to substitute their middle income. And that, I think, is why we see so many huge problems now in the country about how most people can't afford basic cost of living. And the reason why I'm trying to connect this to tariffs is because as a country, we have to figure out a healthy balance of protecting ourselves, but also being able to do business with other countries in a smart way. And there's arguments for both sides. But I do think this brings in the question of how do we promote more small businesses? And how do we promote our country working to help people develop, open up businesses, develop products, invent products? How do we give incentives, or not only incentives, but opportunities for people? And I think the reason why we turn to other countries for distributions or to work with materials being made or products being made is because of the inability to maybe to get it here in our country, or because it's more cost effective. Now, I think you need a healthy balance of both. There are times where we should work with other countries, and there's times that we should not. So this all really essentially comes down to is the economy and how do we fix that? Now, I think that also ties into housing policies, and I highly, highly recommend to look at your town zoning laws, because most of these zoning laws, first of all, a lot of zoning maps need to be upgraded. Some of them are very, 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 I don't know, was built probably when the first piece of paper was invented. So we do need a huge upgrading system with this, because some of them are very difficult to read because of their format, which is probably the original format when the town was developed. But your zoning map is so important because this is when you need to go to your elected officials and say, hey, maybe we should not allow these gigantic mansions, or we shouldn't allow the zoning laws for these gigantic mansions. Maybe we need to have these lots subdivided so you could have two middle class income families, right? And I think that's so important because there are a lot of bigger houses being developed in some parts of the country. And if we have such a shortage of housing, why are zoning laws allowing this? Your city mayor, your city council have the ability to adjust these zoning laws. And if you learn to look it up, it gives you a stronger stance when you want to go to your town and discuss the zoning. You should have the knowledge. And I think that's really important because a lot of these zoning maps are not in the best interest of the economy and not in the best interest of the middle class. So check it out. Go on your local city website and look for the zoning map. And you'll see the breakdown. They might, depending on your town, how they break it up. Maybe it's commercial, maybe it's residential, and then residential is broken up. So maybe it's multi-units, or maybe it's by the housing, each house, individual houses by square footage, or they have different subcategories. So just look it up. And if you notice your town is leaning towards maybe anti-middle class, I think you need to speak up. And the reason why I say this is that a lot of the problems you hear on the news, we hear it all the time: housing, cost of living, people working 2-3 jobs, people can't get a mortgage, people can't find a house, there's a housing shortage, people can't find work, or people can't find remote work. A lot of this has to start with your local politics too. And this is one part. So please check out your zoning maps. Actually, you know what? Let me see if I could show you an example of a zoning map so we could just get an idea of, okay, let me just see. I don't know if we can find one. And I just want to look it up because let's see. And I'll explain why some of these maps are a little difficult to read. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. I think you can. Okay, so this is an example of one town in New Jersey and their zoning map. Now, this is why I always complain about zoning maps, because this is actually not as bad as some of the ones I've seen, but this is what I'm talking about. You have to be able to read it. So if you go through it, not every color is color coordinated. If you go to your key, let me see if there's a color coded one. Okay, here you go. So you see on the right, they do it this. Here's a legend. Here's the zoning, right? So zoning, zone, and then they have the different colors representing a certain code. And if you go over here, this is what the code means. So, for example, R45, residence 45,000 square feet. R30, residence 30,000 square feet. These are the different types of residence. Then you have garden apartments, maybe regional retail, office building. And this is actually, let's see, this is Wayne, New Jersey. Let me just see, yeah, Wayne, New Jersey. And let's see, special business, industrial. And you have to look up all these, what some of them mean, because some of them might not be as easy to understand. But this is essentially the zoning map. Now, I like zoning maps that are a little bit more easier for the average person to read, but it's very hard to find them. They're not very common as far as I've seen. Maybe there are in some parts of the country, but understand this, because this is why maybe we should not be allowing the larger homes. Like maybe we should limit those areas, or the areas that are overwhelmed with a lot of people. Now, if you're in a very, very, very rural area, maybe that's okay. It's fine. You want to have 5 acres, 10 acres, 15 acres, 2 acres, whatever it is, it's okay because it's a very rural area. But when we're talking about these cities, suburbs, areas, maybe we need to think about developing 2 houses on one lot instead of one. So that's really important. Check your zoning map. And in regards to the tariffs, that's a hard subject because it's a slippery slope of being able to protect our own country, but also not ending business in our relationship with other countries. We need a balance of both. So I think that we do have to make more stuff in America. I will argue that. I think we have to give opportunities for people because the more opportunities we have in America, the more jobs we have. The more jobs we have, the better economy we have. So it's all related to money making. So I think that's really important. I think if we could promote or give opportunity and make it easier for people to develop buildings and invent and open up businesses, develop different types of products, and have maybe a little bit less red tape in some states, I think that's important. Now, I wanted to go over also about, we see a lot of the headlines in regards to low birth rates and the big talk about Social Security and Medicare and all these government programs. And I wanted to show you, or I'm going to start to show you. Let's see. If I could just pull this up. Okay. Hopefully you could see this. Yeah, I think so. Okay. So I wanted to go over a little bit about why the birth rate is so important. Now, I'm always accustomed we always do Times New Roman, right? So why the birth rate is so important. Now, I think that it's exaggerated a little bit, 100%, right? So I'm just going to use one, for example. I'm not going to do all these spaces, just one for people that are, I'm going to do 70 to 90 years old, right? We're just going to do 70 to 90 years old. And we are going to do number 2 for those that are, we're going to do a little bit less. More. Okay, maybe these people are 50 to 70 years. Now I'm making it very simplified just because I want to show you something. So then you have 3, right? And then you have 30 to 50 years old, right? And then you have 4, and I'm progressively adding more, right? So then you have 10 to 20 years old, and then you have 5, which is 0 or 1 day old. I'm just going to put 0 just so I can show you. 0 to 9 years old. Okay. And the reason why I'm showing you this in this way is if you look at this, I'm going to try to color coordinate it. You have, just so you can get an idea of what I'm discussing. The whole idea of birth rates is that the previous generation or the younger generation is going to support the older generation, right? So you have, I'll just try to pick a different color. Okay, close enough. Okay, so the idea is that the younger you are, the more people you have. And the idea is that the younger people are going to constantly pay into a system that supports the next generation, the next generation, the next generation, the next generation. So the oldest people should have the smallest group of people. And the reason why is because the finances of the other group is supposed to support the first group. Now, if the birth rate changes, right, it's going to be a little bit different. So this is your pyramid's going to be a little bit different. So what they're saying is, okay, if the birth rate is so low, right, maybe this is what we're looking at when we are discussing birth rates, right? Not so much really a pyramid in the sense that there's huge discrepancies. Now, do I think it's so dramatic now to be worried? Well, yes and no, because on one hand, I do think that there's a huge generation not having children, but I don't necessarily agree with the sense that they don't want to. I think it's just becoming harder and harder to become parents nowadays. And the problem with this is you're going to have more people requiring medical care, right? You need medical care. Maybe you need let's see, you need same thing. You need to be able to maintain all your expenses, right? You're going to have higher cost of expenses. Maybe you need an assistant or a medical assistant to help, or a home health aide. Assistant, home health aide, or maybe you need special equipment for elder. I'm just going to put elderly equipment because maybe you need a wheelchair. Maybe you need a special lift in your house, right? You're going to need a ton of stuff. And maybe you need a lot of, there's medical care in the sense that this is kind of vague, but let's say you're going to probably go to doctors more. You're going to need more prescriptions. You're going to maybe have surgery. So that's going to require extra stuff, etc. Right? So you're going to need a lot of money, right? A lot of money. Now, the idea is the next generation are supposed to be putting into these funds, right? That's why you need a constant flow of money, right? That's the only reason how government programs work. Without money flowing in, money can't flow out. So the reason why we're having so many issues in regards to, or the discussion of low birth weights, is because this generation is not going to be able to afford, or I should say more, this generation is not going to be able to afford to take care of this generation. And that is a huge problem. So I think, though, there are a lot of items that we're not really discussing. And those are, you have childcare, infertility, insurance, right? Mortgage payments, rent payments. You have, the idea of that marriage is changing, right? Marriage is changing. It's becoming longer work hours, right? Multiple jobs. All these items are affecting the birth rate. All of them. And I think it's so important that we have to evaluate these items too. Why don't we have opportunities for moms or women to be able to take off a couple years of work and raise their child, but then go back into the workforce? Or why don't we have daycares in buildings? Or why doesn't your employer have a smaller, I guess, daycare facility in each business, right? And I think that's important. I think that it's important for women to be able to have the protection of employment, but it's also important to be able to raise your child in a safe place close to their mother or father, depending on the situation. And I want to do, not on this episode, but I want to go over all these different policies, because in order to fix the issues about being discussed about the low birth rates and Medicare and Social Security, all these topics that we're hearing about, and all these, or lack of retirement accounts, which is also a whole other issue, is that we need to discuss how to make it easier for children to be born. I mean, there's even one policy, for example, in New Jersey. If you work for a small employer, you're not required to have IVF coverage. So maybe we need to work on that on a national level. Now, there's a lot of high risk. Not necessarily high risk. I shouldn't say that for everyone, but there's risk. So I think there's risk with a lot of these options to have children when there's infertility issues, but we should give access to everyone. If you're complaining about the low birth rates, then why is it from a national point that IVF fully covered under every insurance company, right? You have IUI and other options covered, but the IVF is not covered. So why don't we allow that? Why are insurance companies, for example, in New Jersey, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's like 10 employees or less, they're not required to have IVF coverage. So why don't we make this a national policy? Why are we Congress members not voting on, if you're complaining about low birth rates, you're complaining about Social Security funds, you're complaining about this, give opportunities for people to have children. It's pretty common sense to me. Or how do we protect women from not losing their jobs or being able to be a mom and keep their employment? And I think we need to work more towards remote work, part-time remote, maybe half remote, or I guess like a flexible schedule. Why are we not writing policies to do this? It seems that we worry about red tape about issues that are not so important, but when it comes to these items, we're just kind of, I don't know, not up to par with other standards that other countries provide. So why don't we work on that? Maybe we need to push more remote work. Maybe if you have a certain amount of women or mothers that are on remote work or flexible work, then maybe they get a tax write-off. Or maybe we should push businesses to open smaller daycare facilities where inside the building, so if maybe a corporate building, there's 20 offices or 30 offices, there's maybe a small, I guess, daycare system downstairs or upstairs, wherever it is, and that you could either keep your child in your office with you half the day, part of the day, and then bring them to the daycare, maybe half the day, part of the day, whenever you have a meeting or something, you need to be on the phone. Why don't we have more of these flexible options? Or maybe we need to work on government. If we spend so much from the government spends money a lot on other things, why don't we maybe diverge that money into providing opportunities for mothers and their ability, or fathers, depending on the situation, to have children or be able to stay home with their child to some degree? And I know that's a difficult topic because you're on this fine line between providing the government being too big and the government being too small. And as Americans, we like our, I would say, our freedoms compared to some other countries that maybe are not very freedom advocates. So we have to find that fine line where we give opportunity for women and be able to raise children, but also we need to be able to protect their employment. And protect the employment, I mean, in the sense that they're not walking away from their job 100%, because I think women are at a very big, or parents are at a big disadvantage when you leave to raise your child. Maybe it's only 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, up into maybe their kindergarten. And then it's hard to get back into the workforce. It's very, very difficult. So I think if we had more small businesses, maybe a couple were able to open up a small business and one of them could work there during the day, one of them could work there at the night, or they could switch, and then somebody's always home with a child. I mean, this is all connected on why our country is a complete disadvantage in making it easy for people to have kids. So when you complain about the birth rate, it's essentially the federal government's policies that are failing, and to some degree state. So those are this federal and state. So look at your legislators from there and contact them and complain, because they need to hear. And I think it's important, if you have any stories, please comment below about especially any of these policies we talked about the tariffs, the housing, or if you're having an infertility issues or an inability to maintain your job by trying to raise your child. All these topics I think are so important because they're all connected together to the economy. And as a country, I think no matter what political party you are in, you would have to agree you want the country to be economically healthy and you want the country to be economically flourishing, because without it flourishing, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I think that this is not really necessarily a party issue. I think this is really just saying, hey, do you want your country to be successful or do you want it to fail? And I think it's very simple. So please comment below. Let me know. I want to read through some of your comments, and I will look up some more policies, and hopefully we can see more legislation being introduced hopefully in the next quarter. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.